Good evening, traveler. Tonight, our path leads us to the forgotten halls of a mountain that never truly sleeps, where the echo of hammers has long since fallen silent, and the very stone seems to guard a secret that time itself refuses to silence. When we speak of Moria, one image always comes to mind, that of the dreadful Balrog, the scourge of Durin. A being forged of fire and ruin, whose mere presence was enough to seal the fate of an entire kingdom. But who, or what, is this creature that, even after ages of oblivion, still burns within our imagination? A power so vast it could have laid waste to the great elven realms of Rivendell and Lothlorien, and yet chose exile in the shadows. Why? What kept it hidden in the depths instead of spreading its ruin across the world? And how could a force so ancient remain dormant for so long, unseen by all living things? Imagine, for a moment, those empty corridors, the distant sound of water dripping through the darkened galleries, and a chill that feels born of fear itself. What do you feel as you walk through these desolate halls, where every shadow carries an ancient story? Perhaps a blend of curiosity and unease? For that is precisely how legends begin, with questions no one has yet answered. So come with me, and together we'll uncover what sleeps beneath the mountain. Tonight, we descend into the depths of Khazad-dûm, seeking the answers that lie buried beneath centuries of silence and stone. And before the torches are lit, allow me a simple request: if you delight in wandering through ancient tales, in secrets that gleam within the dusk, and in mysteries that defy sleep, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and join us on more journeys such as this. Now, take a deep breath. Prepare yourself, traveler. The shadows are about to stir, and within them, we shall see that the Balrog is not merely a creature of fire and fear, but a living remnant of the elder days, a spirit shaped by the very music of creation. There are places in Middle-earth that seem to breathe silence. Not the serene peace of a forest beneath the stars, but a heavy silence, dense, like the dust of ages settling over empty thrones and forgotten crowns. No place embodies that silence quite like Khazad-dûm, the mansion of the dwarfs. Today, we call it by another name, one whispered in fear: Moria, the Black Abyss. Picture yourself standing before its gates. The darkness that greets us is not merely the absence of light, it is a presence. Each step inside echoes not only through the stone walls but across the centuries. The galleries open like the ribs of a colossal sleeping beast, and the air is cold, heavy with the memory of metal, the forge, and a lament that time has yet to erase. Here, beneath the mountain, once stood the greatest of all dwarven kingdoms. Halls so vast they could have contained entire cities. Pillars carved like forests of stone, rising to touch ceilings where gems shone like captive constellations. The sound of hammers striking anvils was the heartbeat of the mountain, a rhythm of creation, of wealth, and of power. Khazad-dûm was a beacon of glory, a testament to the endurance and artistry of a people who shaped stone as if it were clay. But now, silence reigns. Where once there was the glow of 1,000 lanterns, now darkness stretches, deep and sovereign. Where once the songs of the dwarfs and the ringing of Mithril filled the air, now only the lonely dripping of water into dark pools breaks the stillness. It is a ruin, yes, but not an ordinary one. It is a mausoleum. A monument to ambition and its terrible price. As we walk through these ghostly galleries, an inevitable question forms in our minds: what could silence a kingdom so mighty? What could extinguish the flame of Khazad-dûm and plunge it into endless night? The answer is not an army, nor a plague, nor the natural decline of time. The answer is a shadow that awoke. A shadow of fire and terror that had slept in the deepest foundations of the world, long before the first dwarf struck his pick into the stone. This place is not merely empty, it is haunted. And what haunts it is not the ghost of what was lost, but the presence of what was found. The ruin of Moria is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of our investigation into one of Middle-earth's oldest and greatest terrors, the Balrog of Moria. A primordial power that turned the dwarfs' greatest creation into their own silent tomb. What was this creature? Where did it come from? And why, for millennia, did it remain asleep, a latent threat at the heart of the mountain? To understand the darkness that fell upon Khazad-dûm, we must journey far deeper, not only into the mines, but into time itself. To the very dawn of existence. Before the sun and the moon had yet traced their paths across the sky, before the first tree grew upon mortal soil, there was the thought of Eru Illuvator, the one, and the music that gave shape to the world. From that music were born the Aina, the Holy Ones. Spirits of immense power, whose essence was to weave the melody of creation. The greatest among them, the Valar, descended into the world to rule it and prepare it for the coming of the children of Illuvator. But others came with them, the Maya, spirits of a lesser order, yet still of formidable might, destined to be the helpers and servants of the Valar. They were beings woven of light and order. Think of Gandalf, of Saruman, of Melian, all Maya, each with their own purpose. But the great music was not pure. A dissonance crept into it, a melody of pride, fire, and darkness, introduced by Melkor, the most powerful of the Valar, who would later be known as Morgoth, the Dark Enemy. And just as his music spread, so did his corruption. Melkor seduced and twisted many of the spirits who heard him. Among the Maya, some were drawn to his overwhelming power, to the promise of strength and dominion that his black flame offered. They turned against the light that had birthed them and surrendered to the shadow. Their very being was remade in fury and terror. These were the Valororca. In our tongue, we know them as the Balrogs, the demons of power. Their transformation was absolute. If once they had been spirits of creative fire, they had now become flames of pure destruction. Their form became a mockery of their former glory, an imposing figure, shrouded in shadows so thick they seemed to devour the light around them, yet from within them burned an infernal flame. They became the embodiment of Morgoth's wrath, his most feared champions, generals of his nightmarish legions. Throughout the countless ages of the wars of Beleriand, the Balrogs stood as the vanguard of ruin. Their arrival on the battlefield was heralded by a roar that shook the earth and a heat that dried rivers. They wielded whips of flame and blades of fire, and few, elf or man, could face them and live. They struck down the great elven king Fina, the mightiest of the children of Illuvator. They led the assault that destroyed the hidden city of Gondolin, one of the last strongholds of light. They were calamity incarnate. But all power that rises in defiance of the cosmic order is fated to fall. At the end of the First Age, the Valar themselves rose up and marched into Middle-earth in the War of Wrath, a cataclysmic conflict that shattered the world. Morgoth's fortress, Angband, was torn apart and cast into the abyss. His armies of orcs were annihilated, his dragons destroyed. And the Balrogs? Most were slain in that final war, swept away like a storm of divine fire. But some, a few, managed to escape. Defeated, humiliated, but not destroyed. They fled the wrath of the Valar and the unbearable light of their triumph. They sought refuge in the deepest, darkest places of the world, crawling into the bowels of the earth, into the roots of mountains where the light of the sun would never reach. They did not flee to regroup, nor to kneel before a new master. Sauron, Morgoth's greatest lieutenant, also survived, but the Balrogs were not his servants. They were remnants of an older power, too proud to bow to any but their original lord. Their flight was an act of self-preservation, an exile into darkness, where they could lick their wounds and hide from the judgment of the victors. And so it was that one of these survivors, a flame of hatred forged in the First Age, found its way into the misty mountains. It burrowed deep, far beneath the peaks that would one day be known as Caradhras, Celebdil, and Fanuid Hall. There, in the silence of the primordial rock, it surrendered itself to a sleep of ages, a sleep that was less rest than hibernation, a state of suspended existence, waiting for what? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps only oblivion. It did not know, and could not know, that above its sleeping chamber, a stubborn and ingenious people would one day begin to dig. The Dwarves of Durin, in their quest for beauty and wealth, were unknowingly knocking at the door of their own ruin. The creature that slept below was not a monster born of the mountain. It was a fallen god, an echo of the world's first war, a relic of terror that time itself had forgotten. And forgetfulness, as the dwarfs would one day learn, is a fragile guardian indeed. And so, the shadow found its refuge. For countless centuries, as the world above changed, while kingdoms of elves and men rose and fell, while the Second Age gave way to the Third, the creature remained in its slumber of stone. It was no conqueror in Moria. No dark king ruling an underground empire. It was something far more fundamental. It had become part of the very geology of the place, a living anomaly in the heart of the mountain. Imagine that existence. A state that transcends our concept of sleep. It was not rest meant to regain strength, but a contraction of being, a withdrawal into itself, where consciousness dissolved into a state of pure latency. The fire that had once consumed armies now smoldered like a lonely ember, buried beneath the ashes of millennia. The shadow that once enveloped all in darkness was now folded upon itself, compact, motionless. We may try to picture that presence. Think of the geothermal heat that emanates from the depths of the earth, a constant, invisible energy, yet ever present. The Balrog was like that. A pulse of unnatural heat within the veins of the mountain. A whisper of power amid the silence of stone. The dwarfs, in their deepest tunnels, may have felt, without understanding, a strange warmth in the rock, a faint humming in the air, almost imperceptible. Perhaps they thought it mere volcanic activity, or some natural process beyond their understanding. Little did they know they were measuring the breath of a sleeping nightmare. The essence of the Balrog is a fascinating duality, a union of opposites that makes it all the more terrifying. It is fire and shadow. Fire, for the beings of Tolkien's creation, is complex. There is the secret flame of Eru, the fire of creation, of life, of light. But this was not that fire. The fire of the Balrog is the fire of Morgoth, the passion for destruction, the fury that consumes, the ambition that burns everything in its path. It is a fire that does not shine, but devours light. A fire that does not warm, but destroys. When the Balrog finally awoke, its flame was not merely a weapon, it was the physical manifestation of its own corrupted nature. A soul of wrath made visible. And then, there is the shadow. The shadow of the Balrog is a shroud of darkness clinging to its form, spreading like wings of impenetrable blackness. This shadow is fear. It is concealment. It is the void left by its corruption. If fire is its rage, shadow is its despair and its exile. It is the darkness of Angband that it carried with it, a mantle of terror that chills the soul and freezes courage. Gandalf, in describing it, said that the shadow spread about it. It was not a side effect, it was part of its being. Fire and shadow, a furnace wrapped in void. But why Moria? Why did this specific place become its sanctuary, and eventually, its prison? Its flight from the War of Wrath explains its need for refuge, but the choice of the misty mountains is meaningful. It fled from the light of the Vela, a light that was poison to its corrupted form. The depths of the earth were the only place where that light could never reach. It buried itself deep in the roots of the world, seeking oblivion in the primeval dark. Moria, or Khazad-dûm as it was then, represented the perfect hiding place. A natural labyrinth of caverns and chasms, long before the dwarfs began their delving. It was an isolated place, silent, and above all, deep. There it could dissolve into the rock, letting the ages flow over it like a slow, heavy river. Its exile was no strategy, it was surrender. An acceptance of defeat, seeking only the peace of oblivion, the denial of its own tormented existence. It did not come to Moria with purpose. It did not choose it as a strategic point. It simply fell into it, like a stone dropped into a bottomless pit. And there it remained, an anomaly of ancient power, a scar from the world's first great wound, unaware of the kingdom that would one day flourish and prosper far above. Its presence was a secret the mountain itself kept, a heart of fire and shadow beating slowly, ever so slowly, in the eternal dark. The image of a power so vast surrendered to a sleep of millennia is, in itself, a profound enigma. A demon of immense power, a veteran of the most terrible wars in the world's history, reduced to a sleeping ember beneath a mountain. It forces us to ask, what kept it there? What prevented this force of destruction from rising and spreading its ruin across Middle-earth once more? The simplest answer, and perhaps the most likely, is that its exile was self-imposed. The Balrog was not waiting for a command. It was hiding. The defeat in the War of Wrath was not merely a military loss, it was a cosmic judgment. The light of the Veiler, the power of the armies of the West, was a force so overwhelming that it broke not only Morgotha's fortress but also the very spirit of his servants. Fear, the very emotion it had once inflicted upon so many, became its own jailer. The depths of Moria were not so much a refuge as a cell. A dark, silent prison where it could hide from the power that had defeated it. But there is another layer to this mystery, one that involves the other great dark power of the Second and Third Ages, Sauron. Had the Balrog waited for an order from Sauron, or perhaps feared him? It is a fascinating thought. Sauron, like the Balrog, was a mire corrupted by Morgoth. Yet their natures were distinct. Sauron was a master of order, deception, and domination. He sought to rule, to control, to bend all wills to his own. The Balrog, on the other hand, was a force of chaos and fury, an instrument of pure destruction, not of rule. It is unlikely the Balrog ever thought of itself as Sauron's servant. They were, in essence, of the same order, remnants of the same fallen power. A Balrog would not bow to an equal. Yet it would certainly have been aware of Sauron's rise. Could the Balrog have remained dormant out of fear? Perhaps. To face Sauron would be to risk annihilation, and the Balrog had already tasted defeat. Perhaps it sensed that the world was not vast enough for two such mighty shadows, and chose inaction as the safest form of survival. Sauron, in turn, was likely aware of the presence within Moria. But why did he not use it? Perhaps because a Balrog is an uncontrollable weapon. To awaken it would be like unleashing a wildfire, powerful, destructive, but one that could easily burn the hand that kindled it. For a master of control like Sauron, a creature of pure chaos was far too dangerous an ally. And that brings us to a third, and perhaps more poetic, theory. One that ties the fate of the Balrog to the very essence of Moria, Mithril. The true silver vein. The rarest and most precious substance in Middle-earth, light as a feather, hard as dragon scale. The dwarfs loved it, the elves coveted it for its beauty that never dimmed. But what was Mithril? From where came its light and power? Some chroniclers whisper that veins of Mithril ran through the roots of the mountain like rivers of imprisoned light, perhaps an echo of the light of the two trees of Valinor, poured into the world during its making. If this were true, then the Balrog, a creature of fire and shadow, had nestled itself in a place that was its fundamental opposite. Darkness seeking refuge amid sleeping light. Could Mithril have had an effect upon it? Perhaps its pure, luminous energy acted as a sedative, a geological lullaby that kept it in its state of torpor. The mountain, rich in that which it most despised, pure light, became the perfect cage. It was imprisoned not by walls of stone but by veins of light. A prison of beauty and power, keeping the beast chained in its sleep. Moria, therefore, was both its refuge and its nemesis, the only place in the world where it could hide, and yet a place that suppressed it, holding it in a fragile balance between existence and oblivion. Whatever the truth, fear, self-imposed exile, or the soothing influence of Mithril, the result was the same. For more than 5,000 years, the shadow remained silent. The heart of the mountain kept its dreadful secret. The Balrog was not a prisoner waiting to escape. It was part of the mountain, a force of nature in stasis, a geological time bomb whose clock had stopped. But as history reminds us, nothing stays unchanged forever. Especially when greed begins to dig too deep. Greed, the wise say, is a fire that consumes the heart. For the dwarfs of Khazad-dûm, this saying would become a literal and devastating truth. During the Third Age, the dwarven kingdom beneath the mountain reached unparalleled splendor. Its wealth was legendary, and at the heart of that wealth was Mithril. With each passing year, their minds delved deeper, following the silver veins that wound through the bowels of the earth. They became the greatest miners the world had ever known, masters of stone and steel. But Mithril, like all great fortunes, carried a curse. The more they found, the more they desired. The richest and purest veins lay in the darkest, most perilous depths, at the very foundations of the world. Driven by boundless pride and an insatiable thirst, the dwarfs dug. They dug beyond reason, beyond safety. They ignored the omens, the strange tremors in the stone, the inexplicable warmth that emanated from the deep. They sought the heart of the silver vein, unaware they were nearing another, one of fire and shadow. In the Third Age, under the rule of Durin VI, the miners of Khazad-dûm made their final discovery. At a depth never before reached, their picks broke through a wall of rock and entered a chamber untouched by light or life for more than 5 millennia. Perhaps they felt a sudden wave of heat, a foul, ancient air. Perhaps, for a fleeting moment, they saw a red gleam in the distant dark. And then, hell itself awoke. We cannot know exactly how it happened, but we can imagine. The awakening was unlikely to have been instantaneous. First, a tremor, a deep rumble unlike any other, born not of geological fault, but of will. The slumbering ember, disturbed from its millennial rest, began to stir. The fire long suppressed flared again in explosive fury. The shadow, once compact, unfolded like a living shroud. Picture the terror of the dwarfs in that tunnel, the sound of stone splitting, of something immense rising. A roar, a shockwave of pure hatred echoing through the galleries, extinguishing torches and hearts. And then, the apparition, a form of darkness, vast and towering, with fire burning within it like a dying sun. Eyes of ember. Wings of shadow. A demon from a forgotten world, torn from its slumber by the greed of beings it scarcely recognized. The violence that followed was absolute. The Balrog, in its primordial fury, made no distinction. It was a force of nature unleashed. Fire and shadow swept through the deepest halls of Khazad-dûm. The dwarfs, the fiercest warriors of the deep, were as children before a wildfire. Their steel armor, their sharpened blades, their rune-etched axes, none of it mattered. They were not facing an enemy that could be wounded. They were facing the incarnation of ruin itself. King Durin VI, lord of the most magnificent dwarven realm, was among the first to fall. He did not die in glorious battle, but consumed by a power he could not comprehend, the direct consequence of his own ambition. The following year, his son Nain tried to resist, a final, desperate attempt to defend his home. He too was slain, and with him, the line of Durin was driven from their ancestral halls. The surviving dwarfs fled in panic, scattering across the wilderness, carrying with them nothing but the memory of their terror. And so, Khazad-dûm fell. The sound of hammers ceased forever. The forges went cold. The lights went out. The kingdom that had once been the pinnacle of dwarven civilization became a silent tomb, ruled by the shadow they had awakened. The Balrog did not claim a throne. It did not wear a crown. It simply existed, a presence of terror that poisoned the stone itself and filled the halls with despair. Here lies the bitterest of ironies. The greatest treasure of the dwarfs, the source of their power and pride, Mithril, was the direct cause of their downfall. In digging for the light imprisoned within the stone, they had freed the darkness that slept beside it. This brings us to one final, unsettling question. Had the Balrog always shared some intrinsic connection with the veins of Mithril? By nesting beside them, had it become their dark and unconscious guardian? Perhaps the act of mining Mithril was not merely a disturbance, but a violation, a theft of energy that, in some way, the Balrog considered its own. And in defending it, it reacted instinctively to protect the treasure that was, at once, its prison. When the dust settled in Khazad-dûm and silence returned, heavier and darker than ever before, the Balrog remained. It did not expand its dominion, nor march to the surface to bring war upon the world. It simply dwelled within the darkness it had conquered, a lonely king in a realm of echoes and bones. And in doing so, it transcended its nature as a mere creature and became something more. It became a symbol. The Balrog of Moria is the embodiment of sleeping dangers. It is living proof that the past is never truly dead and buried. The wars of the First Age, with all their fury and ruin, were never fully resolved. Their embers still burned, hidden deep in the foundations of the world, waiting only for a breath of fresh air, or the strike of a greedy dwarf's pickaxe, to awaken once more. Its existence in Moria teaches us about the fragility of peace. The ages of apparent calm in Middle-earth were built upon a foundation riddled with deep cracks. While kings ruled and peoples thrived beneath the sun, ancient horrors lingered in the shadows, indifferent to the small victories and losses of the surface world. The Balrog stands as a grim reminder that evil need not act to remain a threat. Sometimes, evil simply waits. It is the debt of an older time, a price that, sooner or later, would be claimed. It also represents the eternal and delicate balance between creation and destruction. The dwarfs, in their act of creation, forging beauty and order from raw stone, awakened the antithesis of all they stood for. They sought the light of Mithril and instead unleashed the darkness. It is a powerful lesson about arrogance, the belief that we can master nature and take its secrets without consequence. The mountain held within it both the greatest of beauties and the greatest of terrors, and in seeking to possess one, they released the other. The awakening of the Balrog was not merely a tragedy for the dwarfs, it was an event that echoed throughout all of Middle-earth. Moria, once a symbol of might and a possible gateway through the mountains, became a place of unspeakable dread. A black hole upon the map, a name that inspired fear in all who heard it. The presence of the Balrog sealed that realm, turning it into a tomb of death, as the Fellowship of the Ring would one day discover so tragically. The fall of Gandalf into the abyss, facing Durin's bane, was the last price paid for that ancient dwarven ambition. And Istari, a being of near-divine power, had to sacrifice himself to quell an echo of a war that should have ended long ago. In the end, the story of the Balrog in Moria is a chronicle of balance, the balance between ambition and wisdom, between the light we create and the darkness we may unknowingly awaken. The land keeps deep memories, and the echoes of the world's first wars never fade completely. They teach us that true mastery lies not in digging deeper or hoarding more treasures, but in understanding limits, in respecting the secrets the world chooses to guard. The fall of Khazad-dûm is not only a tale of greed, it is a lesson in the humility required to coexist with powers older than ourselves. The Balrog was defeated, its flame finally extinguished upon the snowy peak of Zaraxigil, not by the strength of an army, but by the sacrifice of a single guardian of light. And within this, we find the final and most important message: hope. The existence of horrors such as the Balrog reminds us that courage and sacrifice are never in vain. For no matter how deep the darkness, or how ancient the shadow, the light will always find a way to answer. The fall of Gandalf was not an end, but a transformation, one that allowed the return of Gandalf the White, greater than before. Even from a tragedy like Durin's Bane, acts of courage and sacrifice forged an unexpected path toward victory. Darkness reveals where the light is most needed. And so, the legend of the Balrog endures, not merely as a warning, but as a testament that even before the most ancient terror, the courage of a single soul can change the fate of the world, proving that hope can indeed bloom, even in the ashes of ruin. The silence of Khazad-dûm remains, but now it is another kind of silence. Not one of ruin or fear, but of peace that follows the storm. The flames have died, the echoes of battle long faded. Let this calm embrace you as well. Let the weight of the mountains become the pleasant weight of sleep. Breathe slowly, and feel safe within this silence. The light of Gandalf still glimmers in memory, subtle and eternal, reminding us that even in the deepest darkness, there is always a way back to the light. And so, traveler, it is time to close your eyes, and let the realm of dreams carry you beyond the mountains, where shadows rest and peace is complete. Sleep well.